Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you good?
Should we like post that link somewhere? Or, okay, I guess not. Um. Okay, yeah. So today is about web apps. So yeah, right.
Cool. How's everyone doing? Thank you. One person. Okay. That's fine. So yeah, I don't know if you guys saw this, but on the Facebook event, there were some like prerequisites to this. First three aren't that important. It doesn't really matter. But the fourth one's pretty important because if you guys are trying to follow along, then you guys need some software installed. First one's Node. Does everyone have Node.js installed? Okay, cool. Okay. Does anyone not have it installed? Okay, this is a shitty system. Okay. How about MongoDB? For Mac, it's really easy to install. For Windows, it's harder. You're good? Okay. Great. Git. Yeah? A text editor? Okay, whatever. All right, let's kick this off. So we're going to start off talking about what we're doing. So we're going to create like a web application, and all web applications rely on something called a client-server model. So a client-server model is basically making use of how networking works. It's based on a cycle called the request-response cycle. So as you can see, there's a guy here. He's using a browser, and that's going to be he's interacting with a front end of an application, which is called like the client. So the client can request data from some remote server. It could request data. It could send data. The web server either provides that data, or if it's getting data, it processes that data. I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. And then it sends a server response back to the client. So all interactions in modern web applications go through this cycle. It's like a push and pull, like give and take sort of interaction between client and server. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool, man.
Okay. If any of you all ever have questions or anything, like please stop us, because this workshop is like pretty involved, and if we lose you in the beginning, first off, it's most likely our fault, and also you might not get very much out of the subsequent things that we do. So I implore all of you to stop us and raise your hand if you have any doubt about what we're talking about, especially during the coding portions. When Brandon's doing the coding, I'll be walking around making sure people are all caught up. We will move at your pace as much as we can.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the front end. So the front end is basically, you see your HTML, your CSS, and JavaScript. Basically, everything that's really processed in like the web browser. So you could just think of it as like the visual component of a web application. The back end, traditionally, like server code or like backend code is basically coded in compiled languages, not interpreted languages. And what that means is like you need a compiler to actually like process and run your code. So it's not traditionally coded in things like JavaScript, which is an interpreted language that's run in your browser. So for our application today, we're using something called Node.js, which is a runtime environment that allows us to code in JavaScript and run that code as our backend. So this is a little bit of what I was talking about before. So there's a network model that has several layers. And the topmost layer is something called an application layer. And what that application layer does is defines a sort of schema for how messages can be passed and defined across a network. So if you ever heard of HTTP, which is sort of like the canonical like application layer protocol, it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it's really just like the method in which clients talk to servers or servers talk to clients. It's all defined the same way, and that just makes it easier for the one message to travel across different nodes in a network. So one common way that HTTP is organized is in a REST architecture, and that stands for Representational State Transfer Architecture. That doesn't really matter. What matters is there are like a few common like HTTP requests under this like REST architecture. The methods are post, get, put, or delete. So Chris is going to explain a little bit about each of these methods.
Thanks, Brandon. So yeah, let's go over just as stated in the previous slide. For every HTTP request that is in a RESTful form, we have essentially two main parts plus an optional third part. So once again, there are four primary methods that we use that basically categorize the type of the request, followed by the path to the resource that we want, starting from in some sort of directory-like structure, starting from the root, which is just called slash. And if it's like a post or a put or a delete, which we will see soon, then there's a body that basically says like, this is the information that we need, that is needed by the server to process that request in some way or another. So if we look at the first example, let's assume, we're talking about this Reddit website, and say that we want to look specifically at like Reddit posts. So the first example here with the post request, a post is when the client wants the server to create something or insert something into a database. So with this request, when a client sends a post request to the resource located at /post, they're essentially saying, post this new Reddit post. And when the server responds, if all is well and good, then the server will respond with something that essentially says, okay, I have created this Reddit post for you. So that's what a post request is. Actually, are there any questions about that? Okay, so a GET request is when the client would like to read something from the server or to get some sort of information from the server. So in this case, if we want to get all of the Reddit posts, because /post is simply the path to the collection of resources that represents all posts, then the client will send that request, and the server will, of course, in an ideal situation, respond with OK, and it will give you a list of all of the Reddit posts. Good? Put allows for the client to request that a particular existing resource in the database is updated in some way or another. So let's say that a post has what? Upvotes and downvotes, right? For Karma. I hope that's the example here. Yes, it is. Okay, so when the client makes a request like put at this particular post, usually there's, if it's not really illustrated in this example, but if you wanted to upvote a particular post, there's often like additional identifiers, like an additional term inside this path here. So it'd be like /post/ something else that like uniquely identifies the resource you want out of this collection. And so you're going to put one upvote on this Reddit post, and the server is going to respond with saying, okay, this post has been upvoted. And then finally, there's delete with /posts. /post posts. The plural form is, I don't know, there are like, people say it's like semantically correct to do one thing or the other, but that's not really point of this. That's a typo. So when the client requests to delete a Reddit post, in ideal world, of course, the server will respond once again saying the post is deleted, and it will, on the server side, on the backend side, remove something from the database. So when we talk about that, if you say like if you were to go to a website, right, like let's say like google.com, what is like the very first thing that you see, right? It's like, I don't know, I mean, like maybe Google is like too complicated of an example, but like basically what happens when you enter that into your browser, the very first thing the client makes a request to for that to that server is a GET request for the resource located at the root directory path. And so the server will commonly just give you a default page, and in almost every like normal configuration, that default page is named index.html. So that's why if you've ever made a website, that very first website that people go to is called index.html. So that's a little fun fact for you right there. And once again, post, get, put, and delete, you can think of as analogous for create, read, update, and delete operations on a database on the backend side. And like a whole bunch of jobs really just involve you implementing these CRUD operations in one form or another in a web app. So that's what essentially we're going to be teaching you all the basics of today. Questions about that? Hopefully it will be more clear as we move on.
Oh, shit. So flashback to 6 slides ago where we said traditionally server-side code or back-end code is written basically in anything that isn't JavaScript. Yeah, that's sort of like the conventional approach. But, oh, I'm not going to say this. Okay, so, but Node.js allows us to write backend code with JavaScript. And the reason for that is there is an execution engine called the Chrome V8 engine made by Google, written in C++, a compiled language that powers Node.js. So you're writing JavaScript, but it's powered by a much more powerful language that is C++, which is pretty crazy. Or I thought it was pretty crazy. So yeah, Node.js isn't a programming language. It's something called a JavaScript runtime environment. And like I said, it lets you like run JavaScript outside of the browser. So yeah. Does that make sense to everyone? If not, let me know. If not, I could. Someone gave me a thumbs up. So, okay. So today, yeah, we're gonna be making a simple Reddit clone web application with a Node.js backend. Okay. Now, the reason why you're here. So, if you guys haven't already, clone this repo. It lives at this link. If not, huh? Oh yeah. So yeah. Let me. Right, I should do it. How do you go do your terminal? Crazy. Okay. This is gonna.
In fact, let me remove this window because that.
Can I do the double thing?
You can do whatever you want, man.
I don't know how to work a Mac either.
Literally.
Okay. So, oh, welcome to my ASMR presentation. I'm just gonna clone this repository. If you guys can follow along, that'd be great. If not, you could just watch me.
Make it bigger.
Chris says to make it bigger, and I'll make it bigger.
Is that good? People see that?
Can you guys see this? Okay, great. Is there any way? Okay. Never mind. So I'm gonna clone it. Oh, what?
Oh, it already. Gosh.
Oh my God. Okay.
Just go into a different directory. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna run it again because I already had a folder called that. Okay, so it's cloned. I do ls, which stands for listing all my folders in my directory. I see it right there near the bottom. Now I'm gonna change directories into it. Cool. So, oh, can I open this?
You can do sub L.
Sub L.
Yeah.
Great.
So go ahead and after you've cloned that, you can open it up in your text editor of choice. If anybody's having trouble with this, please raise your hand.
Yeah, he's gonna walk around.
Yes.
Yeah. Here we go. Sorry. Oh, just open up the whole project in a text editor, and then we're gonna go through it, like file by file.
Can you look up just having trouble like running the MongoDB command because she has to make that like /data/db folder or whatever, and she doesn't have permissions to do that.
Data/db. Can you elevate your code?
Right. Yeah. So we made it, but now we have to own it, right? Yeah.
Should. All good. Are we all good there? Okay. Why is there no index.html? Yeah. So, oh, and here? Yeah, we'll get to that. Okay, so there are things I'll get into called views, and those are going to be your like client side script files and stuff. So we'll get into that. Oh yeah. I mean, we're gonna go through it, but then yeah, if you want to go ahead, I mean, feel free. Okay, are we good?
Anybody else have questions? Okay.
Cool. So we are in this directory right now. It's the open text editor. So what you want to do first is type in, if you've already installed Node, type in node-v, and it will that's to show your Node version. Make sure it's 8.9.4, or else we're gonna have some discrepancy.
They changed the LTS version like between this
Huh? 9.5. That should be okay, right? Should that be okay?
Is your Semver gonna stop it?
Oh shit. Can you show her how to npm install in switch versions?
I don't think I know how to do that.
Or just use n. Like how you do.
Oh yeah, but like, does that come? Oh right. Okay.
Yeah. He's gonna go. Does everyone else have this version? Okay. Cool. So just as another sanity check, npm-v to show that you have version 5.6. It should be like paired, but I just want to check. Are we all good on that? You got it, Chris? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you're on the same. Okay. Cool. So now, before we do anything, we need to install a bunch of our packages or dependencies. So if you look at your text editor, and you open up package.json, which is in your root directory, you can see like a pretty hefty JSON file, and it's basically all the information about our application so far. So we have the name, we have the version of our application, and that's like pretty arbitrary in this case. Engines that we run, which is a certain version of Node. Our main application script. So what that is like an entry point into our application. Like what application do we, what file do we run to have our entire application run? And then we have like a list of scripts, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They all do different things. The keywords, author, these are all Git stuff. So in dependencies, we have these packages right now, and to install them, we just do npm install in the root directory of the project, and it just should install all those dependencies. Cool. It should be like 400 something packages. Chris, are we cool? Should I continue or should I hold off? Okay. Well, guys, get more food if you want. Okay, in app, you just delete this check. Just comment this out. Is he on a greater version? Like a more up? Then I think that should be fine. I think that should be fine. I think there's some like backwards compatibility that, yeah. Well, I mean, you could test it right now if you just comment the condition out. Yeah, just comment it out. Cool. We're okay. We're all good. Okay. We're all good. Okay. Okay. Now let's. Sorry. Okay. Now, everyone type in npm start. Now it's gonna fail, or it should fail. It should should get a Mongo network error.
Says that, right?
I'm getting that. Yeah. So. So yeah, that's fine. That's what we want, because the reason for that is we didn't even set up our database, or we don't have a server that hosts our database yet. So we're gonna do that right now. So we all asked that you like previously installed MongoDB. So if you did, to start a Mongo server, it's MongoD or Mongod. So if you start that, you're going to get a lot of jargon. But the last one's kind of important. It says waiting for connections on port 27017. And that's important because so your server is sitting on your local host, which is your own IP, your own local IP, and sitting at this particular port. So in our web application, if you see, which file is this on? If you go into models and DB, you could see that we define an object called DB. And these are all the details on how to run or connect to our Mongo server locally. So you can see we define it as our local IP, our local host, a port that Mongo's living on, and a username and password and database that we're going to create right now. So this will all make sense soon, hopefully. Mongod. Let me know. Let me know if I can move on. Did it not? I can check it out. Yeah, what's up? Mongo? Okay. Do you have Homebrew? Do you know if you have Homebrew installed? Can you type in brew install? Just okay. Type in. Is that going? So you do have brew. Okay, cool. Yeah, and then to test it, do brew services list. Should list all your. Oh my goodness. Is that it? Brew. Anybody else having? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, do brew services list, and then it should list out all your packages. And you're gonna do brew services start MongoDB, and it should run the MongoDB server. Great. Are we golden? Yeah. Sorry. Whatever. Okay. It's for the brew to. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, we always lose people in the setup.
Yeah, it's rough. Okay, now that we have the Mongo server running, what we want to do is we want to create our Mongo database. So a way we could do that is going into a console, which is sort of like a development environment where we could run commands to like manipulate Mongo, create databases, drop databases, things of that sort. So to do that, we just run Mongo, not Mongod, Mongo. Okay, and it's gonna spew out some stuff, but don't pay attention to it. Don't listen to the haters. I think you need to run, if I'm not mistaken, if you're a Windows user, you run mongo.exe, like the executable found in whatever you download from the community edition.
Yeah, so if you go back to those docs that I had opened up, where I like started copying those commands, if you just go down to step 4 where it says connect to MongoDB, you'll see the thing you need to run, which is it ends in mongo.exe. Does anyone have questions about that? Are we good? Are y'all good?
Dude, installation is so hard. No. Keep it running. Well, you're already in the console, right? Like, you're already in the Mongo console. Does it have, like, a little caret thing in there? Do this. Show DBS in your console. Does that do this? Sort of? Something similar? Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, are we good? Move on. Okay, we are gonna get to the good part. Yeah, so we are in the Mongo console, so we could directly interact with our all our Mongo databases. Now, just like a little context, Mongo is what's called a NoSQL database, and that stands for it could just be NoSQL because it's like not SQL, or it stands for not only SQL. So it's basically a non-tabular database. So instead of like SQL tables, like how many people are like familiar with SQL tables? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So just data tables in general, you know, they have a bunch of tables with a bunch of data in it, and they all sort of like have pointers to each other. It's kind of messy. So NoSQL's approach to storing data looks like just plain objects. So you have curly braces. Each object has a bunch of attributes. And so it kind of looks like JSON notation, if you've seen it. Does anyone, are people familiar with JSON? Can you draw? Yeah, make some JSON to describe a pet.
A pet?
Yeah.
Okay. So all JSON starts with a bracket, and then it's like, so if this is a pet, then we have a name, and in JSON it's kind of like this, where we have a key right here, or the name of a property, and then on the other side is the value of that property. So over here we can say bandit.
Oh my gosh.
And then a pet also has legs.
It
So
does.
we'll say like 4, comma, and then you type no, what's the species?
Dude, I don't know why this is so hard.
We'll say dog, that's a species.
Yeah.
And then when you're done writing properties and stuff, then like this object is called JSON, because this is literally like what JavaScript objects are. It's just a thing that has property names and then values for those properties. That's what
Yeah.
a JavaScript object is. So
Yeah.
when we say that something is in JavaScript object notation, we're saying that the database stores it in a format such that it resembles like a JavaScript object.
Yeah.
If you were to print it out.
So they don't call, like in the database, you wouldn't call this like a JavaScript object. You would just call it what's called a document, but it looks just like that. And so a series of documents is called a collection, and that's how they store things in Mongo. Does that make sense? Or do you have any questions? I know they can't. I know his example was pretty bad. No, we're on live. Okay. God, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, no, like, let's stop for a second and, like, please, does anyone have questions about what we said? So, a MongoDB database has a series of collections. Like, for instance, one collection can be, in our case, it will be like subreddits, okay? And in the collection is all of the subreddits, and each subreddit is represented as what's called a document. And these documents themselves can be represented as a JavaScript object notation. Yeah, like can be written in JavaScript object notation. So each document is like this, and there are many of them inside a collection. And there are multiple collections that represent different types, like subreddits is a collection, posts is a collection, inside one MongoDB database.
So if you didn't understand sort of like the model that we're gonna use for our Reddit clone, like that's fine. Once we actually like go through the code and start like coding up some new models, we're gonna like redraw it out and show all like the relationships between all the models. So like no sweat. What we're gonna do right now though is like play a little bit with Mongo. Right now you could type in, if you want to follow along, help. And you get all these little helpful like commands you could do here. So these are just using the console in general. If you want specific database help, and by what I mean by specific database help, like commands to actually query your data or retrieve data, you could do db.help. enter it, it's going to get database specific commands, or a database specific command manual. So yeah, this is always helpful. I know, especially like if you haven't used Mongo in a while, like this is always like helpful to just like have like a refresher every time you open it up. But yeah, just know that it's there. A useful command is show DBs, like this. And this shows all your Mongo databases and just like prints them in a list. And also shows like the amount like you're using for that database. I remember when we were like making this demo, like I had some like local databases that I didn't delete, and I had like 4 gigs of like data from like a previous internship. So like always check your like previous databases and clean them out when possible. So yeah. So right now what we're gonna do is create a database, and we're also gonna create a user. So I think it's always like best practice to create some kind of test user to test locally and not function as an administrator. I think it's convenient because I could just write right here to authenticate my database in my database object, test user and test, and that's easy. And then I don't have to like divulge my password for my root admin account. Because if you don't, really before we create a test user, you're functioning as root of your computer, and that's not always the best. So yeah, what we're gonna do is use, and this is gonna be our Reddit database. So we're gonna call it Reddit DB. Now this doesn't actually create a database. It just says that we're gonna like use it later. And the reason for that is like it doesn't create a database until a document or collection is stored in it. So if we do use Reddit DB and we go show DBS, it doesn't show up yet. And that's fine. You just have to understand that. Is that good? Is everything fine? Let me know. Okay. Okay, so we do use Reddit DB, and if you type in DB, this shows you the current database we're like operating under at the moment. So when we actually run like commands, it's just gonna work on this DB and not any other database in our like Mongo console. So yeah, that prints out the current database. What we want to do is create a user. So this is going to be kind of hairy, but we're going to do DB, which refers to Reddit DB, create user, and this is a function, and we're going to pass in a few arguments. The first one is going to be a username, and so that's going to be under the key user, and we're going to give it test user because that's what we defined in our like script. We're going to put in a password under the keyword pwd, and that's going to be test. And we're also going to include a list of roles. So roles are basically permissions, like what does this user have permission to do in the database. So it's going to have a read-write permission, meaning it could retrieve data from the database, and it also can create or modify data in the database. Are we good on that? So all 3 attributes make sense. Do you know what we're doing?
Make sure you don't forget the curly braces. They're kind of hard to see, but those are not the same as parentheses.
They always get me. Oh, okay, yeah. In this case, we already made this before, but it'll say it created. Yeah, I thought you dropped it, but I don't know. Okay, I mean, it's fine. Okay, but I mean, after it says you created it, we could do something called get users, and it shows all the users in all the users in your database. So right here, the ID is Reddit DB test user. Its role is read and write. It's just useful information about your users.
So yeah, does everyone see that when they run that?
Yeah, everyone see that? but I will write a write-up after, with just like a cheat sheet, if you want. Wait, Chris, what's the problem you're having? Okay. Get users. Should show your users. Cool. So next, we actually want to see if we can authenticate as test user. And to do that, we use a method called auth. And what it takes is a username and a password. That we already know. Test user, comma, test. And it should return a true or false value. Oh, it's terminated. Oh, shoot. My bad. I did not terminate a string. Okay. So it returns 1 for me, meaning it succeeded in authenticating. And so if you want to see your the active users right now, you could do this command called db run command and then connection status 1. So it sees all the users that are authenticated right now. It's just some other useful authentication information. But yeah, it's more of like a good to know. But now at this point, we've created a user for a specific database. And now when we run npm start in our project, it should be able to like authenticate with Mongo, and we shouldn't get any errors. So we're going back to our project. I'm going to run npm start. Cool. And it should show like 2 emoticons, and it says server running on 8080, successfully connected to a database, RedditDB.
So exciting. Yeah.
Dude, I can't believe we're finally here. We made it. We did it, you guys.
Questions, anyone?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
See that when they run npm start? If you go back
to the like these are this is my Mongo tab and this is my npm tab. I mean, this is my in your root project directory. So just run npm start. Now we could code.
Is everyone okay?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Oh man, okay. Cool. Now that we have access to the database, let me quickly just go through the architecture of the project.
How do you show them the website?
That's a good idea, Chris. And that's why you're the boss.
What's all this code for, bro?
Where's your web browser?
Just go to the desktop too. Or no. It's hidden behind the slideshow.
Okay, yeah. Let's see where we're at right now. Okay, this web app is not going to win a beauty pageant, okay? we have very minimal CSS, but the functionality we have so far is we have our homepage, which says a message, and we have a subreddits page, which will display all our subreddits. Do we have, let me quickly see. Do we have our post thing? Can we create?
You can create a subreddit.
Yeah, you can create a subreddit. So I'm going to create a subreddit called Wholesome Memes.
Do you all know how to get to the website?
Oh, yeah.
If
Sorry.
you open up your web browser and then type in localhost, which is essentially an alias for your local IP address, or your. It just stands for your machine, and then we're listening with our server on port 8080. So do :8080, and then press enter, and you should see the homepage of our website. Does anyone not see it when they do that? If they go to localhost :8080.
In your terminal, it should just there should just be, you could just copy and paste
say,
this.
Yeah, you could just copy paste that
into your browser. So if you go like same thing. Yeah.
Questions?
Does everyone have it point? Okay. Are we cool? Anyone else? No, I'm going to continue. Cool. Okay, so the application as it stands right now, we have a page called subreddits. We have a forum to create a new subreddit, and we list all our subreddits in our database. So if I could, what's your favorite subreddit?
Frugal male fashion.
Oh my goodness. You could have said anything else. Okay, so I'm going to create this subreddit. And it should display right now. So this is really all it does. So eventually what we want to do is be able to go into this subreddit and see a bunch of posts in each respective subreddit. So we have like a subreddit collection right now in our database. That works, but we need to make a post collection in our database and have that relationship between subreddits and posts. Are we clear on that? What we're going to try to do? Okay, cool. I'm gonna look how now. Okay, I'm just gonna briefly go through the architecture of the project, and then we're gonna start coding. So how you should look at a Node.js application is to first look at the entry point into the application, which is defined by main in package.json. So right now, main points to app.js. So we're gonna look there first and see what that invokes. So we could see we're using a library. Require is how you import something, package or library. So we're importing Express, And Express is an HTTP framework. So it just basically makes it easier to make and receive web requests, especially in a CRUD manner. So it makes it easier to make what is it? Create, read, update, delete requests. Okay, don't pay attention to this. This is the juicy part. I love some comments there. So this first line on line 17, we do express.json, which basically tells our app that it could send and receive JSON. So when it's sending, when it's receiving stuff from different clients, it's expecting JSON. So when it does get JSON, it's able to parse it. This line on line 18, it basically tells our app where like our client-side assets live. So that basically includes like stuff like index.html, our styles, and just all things that relate to the front end. You could do images, SVGs, things like that. That's all points to public. And so yeah, we could see in this public folder, there's some styles and there's some client-side JavaScript that we made. So next is we set our view engine. So in this application, we don't use HTML. We use a templating engine called EJS. Now, what EJS does, it provides a sort of interface between your backend and your front end, in that we could call an EJS method and say, we want to render this template or this view, and we want to pass it this data. So it's easier to like pass that boundary if you're passing data from the back end to the front end. And that's what we use a templating engine for. So here we're just specifying that we're using this library. I know that's like a lot of information. Please like ask questions if any of that didn't make any sense. But if not, I'm just gonna like continue. Okay. So last but not least, we require or import our models folder, which we'll go into, and our routes, which we'll also go into. And lastly, after we've imported all those libraries, we just start the server, which you saw in the console. So models are really important. You saw this file already, but here we have a subreddit schema. Now, a schema basically tells a collection or tells a database how a collection is going to look. It specifies all the data types that will be in the collection or that each document will have. So as you can see in the subreddit schema, it has a title, which is a string, and a description, which is a string. So with that, we create a model that expects two different attributes that are both strings. Do you want to add anything?
Right, so the difference between a schema and a model is there's a difference between a schema and a model in that we're using a package called Mongoose, which is I don't quite remember what the acronym is, but basically it's a library that lets us easily interface with MongoDB without having to worry about actual MongoDB logic or like validation or anything like that. And so to use Mongoose, which is this library, we define our schema, which has the fields we expect to insert into our database for each document of a collection. And then in order to use Mongoose to its full potential, we need to create what's called a model. And a model is essentially a way for us to work with a particular document using a JavaScript object, using plain, just like, is like Pojo a thing in JavaScript? Just like, it's a JavaScript object. And so that's like the main usage of why we're using Mongoose. It's so that we don't have to play around with like the actual queries that we would use for MongoDB.
Yeah. So to reiterate what he said, Mongoose basically is like a library to interface between our application code and our database. So we don't need to like perform like raw queries, and like that'll get really messy. One thing I want to point out right now is in subreddit.js, I know we're importing a relative path to our DB file, but this is actually just Mongoose. As you can see, we import Mongoose here, and we do something called module.exports here, and we set it to Mongoose. So module.exports just means when other files include this file, that's what it's going to include. So after we import Mongoose, we use Mongoose to connect to our database. We just export Mongoose. So in other files that we interact with, without having to just import Mongoose every time, we could just refer to this file to use Mongoose's functionalities. Okay, how are we doing? Okay.
Questions?
It's lit. Okay. So, is this okay? I thought this was an error. So lastly, we have we have routes for our subreddit. So the first thing we do in this is to define a router. So Express has their own router class, and a router, what a router basically does, it basically defines a series of endpoints, or these things. It's defined there. So when we enter something, let's just say I have a router that defines a function on /cat. So when we go to /cat in our thing, it should run the function that we bind to that endpoint. So let's just say we have a function that prints out a picture of a cat in text. And if we go to a cat, then it should print out something or do something feline related, I don't know. But what a router basically does, it defines a series of endpoints that we host on our application.
Maybe like walk through the subreddits path.
Yeah. Yeah. So in our main routes folder, we import the subreddits router and preface it with /subreddits. So that means all paths or endpoints that we define in our subreddits router are going to be prefaced with a subreddits path. So all of them are going to be prefaced with subreddits. So if you go back to subreddits, in our first router bound function, we're going to have, we have a router, and then we do get, which is to, if you recall, like a client retrieving data. Get /. So that means if you go to this and we make a GET request, which your browser implicitly does when you go to some URL, it's going to run this function. Does that make sense? Or do we have any questions about that? Okay. So, wait, oh, I'm not running the server.
It's on desktop too.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So when we are on here, so what it does is it uses the subreddit model. It has a Mongoose specific function called find. And what find basically does, it when given like an object of parameters, it goes out and tries to find a document that fulfills or satisfies those parameters in our subreddit collection. So we're basically like giving it, okay, does it satisfy all these requirements, and go out and find this document in the collection or this subreddit case. So in this function, we want to fetch all our subreddits. So we do a subreddit model find, and because we would just want to find all of them, we give an empty object. We give no requirements or parameters. And then we have something called a callback function. Now with JavaScript, JavaScript is what's called a asynchronous interpreter language. So asynchronous means that code. What's the best way to describe asynchronous?
So imagine like you you're like, say like you're calling you're like ordering food for delivery, and you call up like a restaurant and you say, hey, I'm gonna order this thing and I want to eat it. So you're obviously not gonna get that food immediately, right? But like you can go on and do other things while the restaurant is preparing the food and going to deliver it to you. And then once it delivers it to you, you will eat it. So in this analogy, the asynchrony, right, like the asynchronous behavior is you telling the restaurant you want to order food, but then you can do other stuff while that thing is doing whatever. You don't expect a response like right away, and you don't stop everything you're doing to wait for a response. That's what we mean when we say asynchronous nature. When you get the food, when you eat it, that eating action is what we can call a callback function, and that is what you do once you have received whatever you wanted to receive from the asynchronous call.
So in the context of this, if Chris is like the Mongoose library, and I'm like, okay, here's like a list of parameters. I want you to find this document. Okay, come back to me once you found it. So he's gonna leave, find that document, and he's gonna come back to me. And I'm like, oh, thanks, okay. And now I'm gonna run whatever is in this function, this callback function. So that's basically what it's doing. So, okay. Yeah, and we don't really define that. This goes sort of like into the operating system in like the web browser, and how it like arranges processes. But yeah, you could think of it as we're just like waiting for him. And in this, we don't execute anything within this function at least until we get word that like Chris came back. So I mean, in our callback function, the subreddit model, or Mongoose, defines two things. The first parameter is an error, and the second is our potential list of subreddits. So if there's an error, it means like something went wrong, like Mongoose couldn't execute the query for some reason, or something else went wrong. So when we have an error that's like defined or like not null, we want to do something to like tell the user on our application that something went wrong, something didn't go according to plan. Because if we automatically assume that subreddits exist and everything like went okay, that could like lead to some kind of like unexpected error. So first, we want to like check if the error exists. And right now, if the error exists, we send back a 500 error, which means there's an internal server error. And then we send some JSON back, which contains the error. So that brings me to what these variables are. And rec and res stand for request and response. So this kind of goes back to the concept we talked about earlier with the request and response cycle. So in our request object, it has sort of information that's important for the request we're being sent at this endpoint. So let's just say it was a post request, and then we're being sent some data. So in a post request, to check that data, we could do rec.body.title, for example, to like locate like the data that was sent under the attribute title. So, and like the response variable refers to what we want to send back. So we're getting a request. In this request object, we know information about the request we just received. And the response object, it gives us a list of methods on what to send back. Okay, I mean, this will make sense once we do stuff. Okay. Do you want to talk about EJS for a little bit? Because we do res render.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Okay, so Brandon mentioned EJS. I'm going to talk about it a little bit again. EJS is what I convinced Brandon to use as our template engine because it is literally just JavaScript. And we like that because that means we don't have to learn any new syntax besides just like the one EJS tag that we use for our HTML. EJS, honestly, like we say it's not HTML, but if you look at a .ejs file, you can look at all of our views inside this views folder. These are our EJS files. And you can see, if you've seen HTML before, you can see like it's so close to HTML. Like, I don't even know why. Well, no, I do know why they call it EJS. It's it's basically HTML, but like that's what makes EJS so simple to use. So all the files inside this views folder is so like the index, the sub, and the subreddits.ejs files. These are what are called templates, right? They're like HTML templates in a way. And using EJS, we can dynamically render them with content that we pull from the database into an HTML document that we will ultimately send as our HTTP response to the client. Does that make sense? There's a lot of information in that one sentence, but it's like, if I had to boil it down to one thought, that is what EJS helps us do. EJS, once again, it helps us by allowing us to feed it data from our database that we can use to dynamically render HTML content into an HTML template. And then that HTML template will itself be a legitimate HTML file, and we will send it with the server to the client, which was requested of us when they did the GET request. Right? Does that make sense? So if you look on this, the easiest example we can see here is if you open up index.ejs. Index.ejs is literally like the first page that we see when we open up our server. So if you go back to our server here, and if you're running our server and you go to localhost 8080, you will see I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. That is the message thing that we passed here. So how did we pass in that message? Well, we used a method called res.render, response.render. And what response.render does is the first argument takes the name of the EJS file that we want to render into a real HTML file. And the second argument is a JavaScript object representing the properties we wish to pass into the EJS file so that it can use it, so that our EJS template engine can use it. As you can see, this is found in the index.js file under our routes folder. The first property is called title. Second property is called message. This is the title and this is the message. So hello Hacknight, I for one, welcome my robot, whatever. And if we look at index.ejs, this right here, this angle bracket %equals, this is essentially like what tells EJS that, all right, this is no longer a normal HTML tag. This is an EJS tag. And everything inside this EJS tag until you close it with a % bracket is going to be just straight JavaScript, like basically. So when we say title here, okay, okay, so title is not straight JavaScript, but like so title here is in reference to the name of the property that we passed in as the second argument to the render function. So if you look back at localhost 8080, you can see the title of the tab here. How do you zoom in on this? Boom. It says hello Hacknight, right? Right there. Okay. And as you can see, the message here says, I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. That's the thing exactly, precisely what we passed in as the message type in our JavaScript object. And then when we threw it into the template engine, it rendered it out right here inside our container. Cool? So that's what EJS is. And I guess we'll just go ahead and start filling in a different endpoint. We have an endpoint here. So if we go to our subreddits, you can see we have these links that should be clickable. If we look like down at the very bottom, when you hover over this link, it should say /subreddit/ this really long ID. So that's like our way of saying like when the browser requests that, it should get us the content from that subreddit, which includes what? All the posts, right? We haven't implemented that yet. And that is going to be the route defined here inside the subreddits.js routes file. And it's going to be what Brandon's going to fill out. And yeah, we'll get straight to it, I guess.
Question.
Is this EJS thing what allowed the subreddits tab to like update automatically with the new subreddit?
Exactly. Yes.
That is exactly it.
That's exactly right.
As you can see, it's on line 11. We do response, render. We choose like the template, which is subreddits.ejs in the views folder. And then we give it an attribute called subs, which is sort of like the collection we get after like the find query finishes.
Right. So subs is an array, and then when we pass in the properties as the second argument, we're assigning that array to a property that's also called subs, and then that's what EJS will use in the template.
And what's cool is like you could put a legit like for loop in your like EJS template, as you can see starting on line 24 in subreddits.ejs. Yeah, zoomed in. So we're looping over the variable subs, which you said was an array. So it has a method called length to determine how long it is, and then after that, we after we end this EJS tag, we could put straight JavaScript for the number of times we loop through. Oh, HTML, straight HTML in here. And this also gets like the title and the description for each subreddit that we pass in.
Cool.
Wait, do we want to stay on this for a little bit? Okay, I'm changing. Okay, so like Chris said, we want to, look at my notes. Oh my goodness. Like Chris said, we want to render a subreddit when we click on a link in our subreddits. So if you click on this link, it's not going to work because we're not really doing anything. It doesn't really lead anywhere. So what we want to do is we want to define a route, a get route right here, for /:ID. So what this allows us to do is that, Express parses this route in a certain way where it pays attention to these colons. So what the colon denotes is that like the rest of the route is going to be like a parameter that we could like retrieve. And then we retrieve that parameter by going inside of a request at params and retrieving that ID manually by .id. And this could be like really anything. This could be like dog, and I could do rec.params.dog, and I'd be able to retrieve the data. So if we have subreddits like hello/hello, then dog is going to be equal to a string called hello. So any data we like pass in here, we're retrieving here. Does that make sense? But what we're really interested in is like the subreddit ID. And like Chris said, if you hover over this, you could see that we've already rendered the ID corresponding to each subreddit in this like subreddit list. So it already gives us the ID. We just need to retrieve it. And so like I said, we do :ID and we retrieve it with rec.params.id. Are we good with that? Okay, now, cool stuff. We're gonna use the Reddit model, the subreddit model again, and we're gonna do a function called find by ID, and we're going to pass in the subreddit ID. So find by ID trivially accepts a subreddit's or just an ID for an ID that corresponds to a document in the collection that this model corresponds to. So a subreddit ID that corresponds to some sort of subreddit document in our subreddit collection. So this is kind of oh wait. Oh right. Okay, before we do this, hold on. Yeah. Chris is gonna write out or reiterate like our database diagram and how subreddits are going to relate to posts, because that's pretty important in our next step.
Okay, so inside our database right now we have what? A subreddits collection, right? And each document in the subreddits collection has what did Brandon say? It was a title, right?
Let's look at the model.
A string
and a description.
And a description, which is also a string.
Right.
There has to be some way for us to associate posts with a particular subreddit, right? So
yeah.
That's where database design comes in, and I guess we can talk about
yeah.
what like post schemas.
Yeah. So that's what we need to create right now. So our post schema is going to look very similar to our subreddit schema, in that we import Mongoose, which is DB. We get our schema that's located in Mongoose to be able to like define the schema, and then we want to define a schema for posts. So we use this method called schema, and then we give it an object which is a list of attributes, with the key being like the attribute name and like the value being like the attribute's data type. So each post is going to have a title. That's going to be a string. It's going to have a link, which is also going to be a string, and some content, which is going to be a string also, I guess. What else was I going to say? Okay, so we want to, construct a model from the schema, right? So we're going to do db model, the name of the model, which is going to be just post, and we're going to pass in the post schema. And so that when we import models / post, what's going to be imported is this model class that's based on the post schema. And with this model, we're able to like interact with the database, right? It serves as sort of an interface for interacting with the post collection. So cool. Are we cool with that? Okay. Now, so we have a post collection and we have a subreddit collection. They both have their respective schemas. But now we want subreddits to be related to posts, because each post has each subreddit has their own like posts. So how do we construct that like relationship is what's important. So what we're going to do, the basic idea is we're going to have an attribute in the subreddit schema called posts. And what that is it's going to be an array of IDs. And each ID in this posts array like a post array with a bunch. So this will make a little bit more sense. When we go back to this, we could actually construct our query. So we do subreddit model find by ID. We pass in the subreddit ID, and we're gonna do something called chaining. We're gonna chain functions, and what we mean by chain functions is that each function's going to run one after the other. So we do this, we're gonna run a function called populate. So after find by ID is done, it's gonna chain and run populate. And what populate's gonna do is it's given a string called posts. And posts refers to this attribute in the subreddit schema. So it tells the subreddit model to find a document by a subreddit ID and then populate its post attribute. So it's gonna go out into like the post collection and then populate each element that contains like the post ID with like the actual document in the post collection that has a matching ID. That was kind of like a lot of information. Can someone, if someone's confused by that, please like ask us questions. But that's what the populate method does. And after a chaining sequence, we want to run a function called .exec, and that's basically saying we want to just execute this entire chain of queries. So .exec accepts a callback. So it's going to have an error and a potential subreddit if everything works out correctly. If we have an error, we're going to do the same thing where we throw back an error. We throw internal server error and pass in the message. Else, we want to render a template and pass in the sub. Cool. So this refers to a template here. And yes.
It won't do anything yet.
Yeah, it won't do anything yet. Yeah. Do I know?
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have questions about that little sequence right there? Pretty hefty mongoose speak over there. So it's okay if you have questions because it's kind of still confusing for me. So yeah, let's make this a little bigger. Right. So what exactly is this last line here at line 26 doing? It is, once again, it is passing an object that we called sub, corresponding to supposedly the subreddit that we get from our database. And it's going to use that object to dynamically render the template called sub. And that is, if you go to our views folder and click sub.ejs, let me close off some of these things that we don't really need anymore. We go to sub.ejs. Right now, all we have filled in is the title and the description, and then some hard-coded posts. If we restart our server, so you can turn off the server by hitting Control-C, in case you weren't aware, and then run npm start. So if we go back to our web browser and run localhost 8080, we should see, once again, the home page. We go to our subreddits. Now, when we click on one of these, let's click on Wholesome Memes. Schema hasn't been registered for model post. Oh, right. We haven't made a post. Like, have we made a post model? We did, right?
Okay.
Oh.
Sorry. Yeah, I forgot a step. Okay. So this is really close. So as you can see, the mistake I made was, okay, so I import the models folder. And when you import a directory, which is models, it looks straight at the index folder. So it doesn't directly import our post schema or our subreddit schema. We have to import it into this index folder. So that's what I didn't do. Well, we can do that right now. And yes.
All right. So, assuming Brandon stops sabotaging me, let's see if this will work. Go to our subreddits. Click on one of these. Yeah, great. Okay, so we have what is our subreddit page. Look pretty recognizable. We have our sidebar right here. Yeah. And then these are our posts that don't do anything. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna let's first give ourselves a way to create a post. How about that? Right? We still haven't done that really. Huh? Oh, I think I have that right here. Right? That's what this is. Is that not what that is? Wait, really? Oh no. All right, yeah, sure. I'll look at that. Okay. Yeah, so
This is in
this is in the subreddits. Yeah. Okay. So what, like, do you want to do this? Okay, yeah. We need to find a way to all right. Let me see what you got here. Okay. We need to find a way to create posts, right? So we're going to create a post method on the subreddits route. Right underneath the one that we were just adding, and we'll call it post, right? And so when we add a post to a subreddit, we already know what the subreddit is, so that's going to be passed in as an argument to our path here under as :id. And we have our callback function, of course, with a response, or that is going to lead to some nasty errors if I do that. Request and response. And finally, let us first create our posts, which we don't have a model for yet, right? Oh, we do. Oh, what was that one? Okay, we do have a model for it. It's a title, a link, and content. So we're going to use our post model, which we should probably import. At the very top, you just do a require // models / post. And then we can use our post model. We're going to call a function called create that lets us create a post model that we will soon save to the database. So we have one thing here that is called the title, which we can find inside our, which we'll be able to find inside our request body eventually. So we'll go ahead and initialize these to be title, link, and content. And rec.body is the body of our request, right? So it's on. So we usually have a body inside our HTTP request as needed. In this case, it is needed because when we're making a post method, we need to be able to know like what exactly we're inserting, right? So we're going to go ahead and grab each of these properties from the body. And from there, we can just, this is probably not needed to do this like that, is it? But basically, we're making a JavaScript object here with the key being title and then the value being whatever what we had gotten from the body. Does that make sense? And then from there, after we create it, essentially, we have another callback function that allows us to save it. And what is this part right here? So basically, if there's an error, we're going to send some sort of error back as JSON. Sorry, res.status. We're sending a 500 status as JSON. that means we have created our post and we will update it. And we need to update our appropriate subreddit model because we have to make that link, right? Like that connection between the post and the subreddit. So every single subreddit document has an array of object IDs corresponding to the posts that it contains. So we'll go ahead and update. And inside this update function, we have our first argument, which allows us to identify the subreddit we wish to update. So we're going to go ahead and grab that from the route parameter, like so, on line 34. So this first object will be a way for us to, once again, uniquely identify the document we wish to update. And in that document, we are going to do something called a push operation. We're going to push onto posts, post dot ID. Is it underscore? Are you sure? Underscore ID, yeah. And with that, we have our code here. Let me make sure my brackets are straight. It's got to be one more right here. Yeah, okay. So what exactly did we do in this else statement here? After we had created our post, we took the ID of the post, and we're going to push it onto the back of this post array that we created.
One last thing is this also takes a callback function. So we're going to define that right now. One important thing to note is that we always want to send something back as a response, or else this function is just going to run forever, like it's never going to terminate. So that's why it's important to, even though we don't really have anything of importance to send, we're still going to send a 200 error, I mean not a 200 error, a 200 status code, which basically means that like everything's okay. And what is passed back if there's no error, it basically sends, Mongo has its own like okay sort of object that it sends back. So we're just going to send that back to the client. Else, if there's an error, we're going to do our usual internal server error. Oh, this is JSON. These are JSON. And we will send back that error. Cool.
Okay. Questions? We lost you, didn't we? Okay, well. Yes. This one? Do you have a question about it, or just want to see it? Sure. Right, so now if we implement a form, we should be able to create a new post. Does that make sense? Now that we have this post endpoint created. Okay. Let's just do one last thing. Let's create the form so that we can see the posts. Does that sound good? Let's just create the form so we can see the list of posts. We don't have to do like getting a specific post or anything like that. Okay. So we don't have a form, first of all, inside our subreddits page. Even if we restart the server, we refresh and grab it, we're going to put a form right here, right in this little section here in the sidebar. It's not usually there on normal Reddit, but like it's just most convenient to put it there for us. All right, we're gonna put a form there that lets us fill in a post, or that lets us create a post. So what exactly do? We go to the template defined that gives us this page here, and we're gonna create a form. The sidebar is inside the aside element, and so we'll go ahead and say, we'll give it an h2 tag, and we'll say create a new post. And then we'll create a form. This, I don't really want this to be a tutorial on forms, but basically, a form HTML element has 3 main attributes that we should be concerned with. An ID, you all are aware of that, right? For HTML. It also has an action, which in this case is going to correspond to the same path that we just created for the post that allows us to create a new post, which is /subreddits/ the ID of the subreddit. And then finally, it has a method, which we specified to be the post method. Make sense? So what exactly does a title or a post have, right? We can make labels, right? The first thing that it has is what? A title, we said. And then if we copy and paste these, then we have a description and a link. Yeah? So for the title, it's what? An input, a text input specifically. We'll call it title. We'll give it an ID for the front end client side script that we're going to write. Let's make it required. We'll do the same thing by creating an input for the link at the bottom here. We'll call this form link. And we'll call the name, we'll let the name be link. And the type is a URL. Yeah? Making sense so far? So we have two text boxes basically, okay? And then finally we have a text area, which is gonna contain all of our content. We'll call that content. Oh, well, right, the post has content. It's not description. Let me make sure. Yeah, it's called content. And so inside our text area, it will have, we'll give it an ID of content. And if we refresh, great, we should have our form. We didn't fill out the labels, but we should have our form. Oh, we need a button to submit the form, right? That'll probably help. Cool. Check it out. So, this won't do anything, or it won't do what we expect quite yet, because we still need to serialize the form data into some form, this is something that's readable by our server. But I didn't want to go too quickly through this, but honestly, like creating the form is sort of it's just an exercise that must be done, and we should have done it like not as part of the tutorial. We should have just made it for you, but that's a form, HTML form. Questions about that? Should I okay, who's like still following along? Are you all like, yeah, like, can you see what I see? You haven't finished typing out the form? Right, that'll be an issue. All right, well, I'll just leave that there for now. Are you, Okay, yeah. If you want a fast way to do this, you can go to our branch, our Hacknight branch on the GitHub repository, and then you'll find it, and you'll find our form right underneath the in the views, sub.ejs. You'll find it right here. Just command C that bad boy, and it'll just give you the same thing. Or you can type it out. We're almost at the finish line, I think. Thank you all so much for sticking with us. If you need help, raise your hand. Brandon will be right with you. Can anyone see the form yet? You can split it up a little better. I don't know. Is there?
I don't know. I feel like the cake was spicy. I don't want to have an allergic reaction.
Oh, I don't know, dude. I haven't tried the cake. I'm sorry. Let's get rid of the required from the from the link. We don't need that to be required. Is anybody in need of assistance? Yes. Jesus Christ. Are we okay? How's the form look? Is it there? Yes. Should the form be doing anything? It shouldn't really work yet. But you see the form now? Awesome. Does anyone else need help? Yes. But like it's good now.
I think she knows what it's like the problem is.
Okay. Sure. Okay. What I want y'all to do now is go to the subreddits.ejs file and copy lines 32 through 36. Yeah? We want jQuery and we want a script file to be inside our other EJS. All right, now go back to sub.ejs and put that right under or right above the closing body tag. So this should go right above the closing body tag. Now after that, on line, well, for me it's line 46, but the scripts tag right underneath the jQuery one, change /scripts/subreddits to just /scripts/sub.js. That's going to refer to a client-side JavaScript file that we're going to make right now. So go ahead and right-click the scripts folder under the public folder, and should say something like new file. Hopefully Adam and VS Code do this as well. So you can create a new file here and call it sub.js, and go ahead and save it to the scripts folder. And then what I want you to do is there's a subreddits.js file right under it. You see it? Go to there, select all, and then paste it into this one over here. So this code is client-side JavaScript that will allow us to submit the form. For the sake of brevity, I won't go too much into this, but this is what basically allows the client to make the request in the first place. Okay? We need to make a few changes. Instead of it being called hashtag subreddit-form, it should be hashtag post-form. And instead of the data being title and description, it should be title and content. And then change the ID from form-description to form-content. and then add a new field right under this. So just press enter under line 4 and add a link and call it hashtag form dash link dot val. And that, I believe, should be good. Assuming that I made the EJS file exactly the same as it was before. All right, so at this point, we're all good there. Okay, let's see if we can post something. So it probably won't show up because we haven't just dynamically rendered the page yet, but that's an easy thing to do, I think. So go ahead and rerun your server, refresh, and get down to a subreddit, and then we'll make a title and say, finally, this is some content. Put whatever link you want in here. Google works. And let's hope for the best here. Okay, so it didn't look like it did anything, right, after you pressed create. But if we go to our database, so if we open up a Mongo shell, all right, well, I'm right here. And if I were to do db dot posts, I believe, dot find, we should see in there a document that is our post that we made, right? Title is finally, link is google.com, content is this is some content. Do y'all see that? No? Yes? Maybe? Working on it? Do y'all remember how to get to the Mongo shell? If you're on a Mac, yes, it should just be Mongo. And then use Reddit underscore DB. And then you can call db.posts.find. Yeah, use Reddit underscore DB. And then db.posts.find. And you should see an object ID there after you click create. It's not there? Interesting. That's a legitimate strategy. I'm not going to bash you for that. In fact, we might just do that. All right. Does anybody else not see it? Do you see it? guy already did this last part, but we're just gonna do it right now. Go back to our GitHub page, and everything inside the main tag, just copy that and put it in there. That's the last thing we'll do for today. Yeah, so like all this, right? Copy this. And throw that into sub.ejs. Replace everything in the main tag with that. So it looks like this. And then finally, run it. And as you can see, we are now dynamically rendering dynamic our posts. Yes. Right here. Yeah. So these numbers, this number indicates the unique ID that defines the subreddit. So if you look inside the MongoDB database, if we look inside subreddits and we go and we look at all of them, you'll see among other things that there is an object ID here. That's what that is in the URL. This is unique to each document in the database. And so we're just using that as an identifier for our resource.
So what you would probably have to do is in your schema, there are certain flags you could do to make a certain attribute unique. So in this case, you would make the name of the subreddit unique, and then instead of passing in a subreddit ID, you would pass in
the name of the subreddit.
Name of the subreddit.
Yeah.
And that's how you would do it.
Right. Okay. Well. Yeah, so did everyone copy and paste the part here? This is where we were going to talk about the EJS and how basically you iterate through the posts that you pass in to your endpoint, and then we will use that to generate each of the posts. And so that's why you see it, you know, oh, that's a good name, another one. And then you can just create, and it makes another one. Does anyone not see that? Okay, well, I mean, we're gonna go ahead. It's probably past time, so other things that you can do if you want to check out the rest of the code on our RIP repository, you can eventually you want to implement, you know, being able to click on these posts and them going somewhere useful. Right, so you can actually look at them, and then you can also deploy this to a different computer other than your own, and then other people can access your simple version of Reddit using Heroku. But yeah, we're not gonna do that unless you all really want to. But if you all have no further questions, we'll stay up here for a little while longer. We will post this code. It's already up on the GitHub repository. We'll post it. We'll post the slideshow as well. And thank you all so much for sticking around with us.